Is it always so cold here? Is it? I thought perhaps it's because I'm coming from California that I'm so cold. But in any event, I feel a bit like Malcolm X felt when he responded to the previous speaker, but let me first respond to the speech, and let me tell you that hearing Malcolm's voice and seeing his image brings back a host of old memories for me. Of hearing Malcolm in person, I had the opportunity to hear him when I was an undergraduate at Brandeis University. Of hearing him on recordings, in those days we only had records, of participating in radical reading groups, reading his speeches, working with an organization called Los Angeles SNCC, working with the Black Panther Party. And we were all very much influenced by Malcolm X. And this evening, as I watched him speak here 50 years ago, I find it difficult to believe that he was called the angriest black man in America. Don't you? One gets a sense of the ideological work that that kind of demonization can do. But I want to observe that Malcolm X made a certain kind of critical discourse, popular critical discourse possible, that perhaps had not been heard in the US since possibly W.E.B. Du Bois, who was, of course, a target of the official anti-communism of the US that was so often used against radical intellectuals and organizers. We are often led to think about Black history in the US as a series of debates. And those of you who are familiar with that history know about the important debates between Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, and then W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey, and then Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as if there were always ever only two sides, as if it may not have been possible to embrace something of both sides. But I tended to side with Malcolm, especially after I heard him my first year in college. But I wasn't so sure about his nationalism. Perhaps one might have thought about it as a kind of strategic nationalism, but I'll tell you that, I'm saying this parenthetically, when I met him, I actually had the opportunity to meet him, and that was only because I was one of 5 or 6 Black students on the campus where I was studying. So I'll never forget that moment. But you know that this period, and you've heard some very important presentations, Malcolm really began to flourish once he left the Nation of Islam. As he pointed out, he became a Muslim in a more global, international sense. But leaving the Nation of Islam was important, although I have to say that I don't want to completely disassociate myself from the Nation of Islam, because they've done a lot of important work, especially in prisons. Malcolm X would never have emerged as he did had it not been for the Nation of Islam. And certainly those of us who do prison work today, who work against the prison industrial complex, are very much influenced by that stance toward education which he received from the Nation of Islam. And the Nation continues to do important work in prisons today. At that time, I was very concerned about the backward views on women that were advocated by the Nation of Islam. And this was also characteristic of nationalist organizations more broadly. And you probably noticed in listening to Malcolm speak that he always talked about men. I think the only time he spoke about women was when he referred to the conversation he had had with two women students. And he made a very sort of uncomfortable joke about that as well, right? Did you get it? I was actually at that time, I think, not trying to exclude, but trying to connect. Eventually I wrote a book in which I talked about gender, race, and class, but at that particular time it was very inchoate. I felt this impulse to connect rather than exclude. And this sense of the interconnections among race, class, gender, sexuality, disability, nationality, etc., is what came to shape a new kind of feminism. Years later, I wrote an article on Malcolm X, and unfortunately, I only thought about it in this context, and I can't even remember the title of the article. But I do know it was published in an anthology on Malcolm X that was edited by Joe Wood. And in that article, if I remember correctly, I was speculating about the trajectory Malcolm might have followed had he not been assassinated. I was asking whether he might have moved in a feminist direction. Would he have radically changed his ideas on women? And my answer to that question was in the affirmative. Now, I want to, probably don't have very much longer, about 2 minutes or so. Okay. And then, and in my conclusion, perhaps I can respond to some of the points made by the previous speaker. And I can say I learned a great deal from your presentation, Graham Abernethy, and I learned a great deal and was very moved by your presentation, Ben Okri. I have to admit that I was trying to contain myself when I heard some of the things you were saying. It's especially your global, universal characterization of Islam. Islam is not, it is not homogeneous. Well, you did characterize Islam in a very inappropriate way. And I also took issue with your assumption that a sense of connectedness among peoples of color has somehow to be biological, that it can't be political. And I actually do remember that era of third world unity. And I also remember that Northern Ireland was included. So it wasn't simply about race, it was about politics. A very close friend of mine who was very close to Malcolm just recently died. Her name was Yuri Koshiyama, a Japanese-American woman who befriended Malcolm. They both lived in Harlem, who introduced Malcolm to Hiroshima survivors, and who, as a matter of fact, was with Malcolm when he died. There's a very widely, well, perhaps not widely enough circulated photograph of Yuri leaning over the body of Malcolm. And I wonder why people don't acknowledge her in the way that they should. Somehow or another, the fact that she's Japanese American doesn't fit into this, narrow black nationalist paradigm. But what Yuri demonstrated, and I could speak about her for hours, believe me, she was an amazing activist and did extremely important work around the freedom of political prisoners. But what Yuri Koshiyama did was to demonstrate that what we call the black radical tradition, of which Malcolm X is a part, belongs to everyone. And that the struggle for black freedom, whether it be in the US or whether it be in Africa, can be an inspiration to people everywhere who believe in justice and freedom. Thank you.